Well, welcome everyone to the Stop the Cuts and the Stands election webinar, where we're happy to be joined by some prominent guests in the community here in Saskatoon and around the province. My name is Charles Smith. I'm a professor of political studies at the University of Saskatchewan at St. Thomas More College, and I've been asked to moderate that discussion today. We've been asked to introduce our sponsors, which are Stop the Cuts and The Stand. And if you don't know, The Stand is a hub, a community hub that we sit on the board of, myself included, that helps build movements for social, environmental, and economic justice by facilitating the exchange of knowledge, of resources, and mutual support within a decolonizing framework. And Stop the Cuts is an activist organization that is also a grassroots for everyone in Saskatchewan affected by or deeply concerned about the cuts, privatization, and elimination of public services here in the province by the current government. Just before we start, I want to acknowledge that we recognize that the Stand and Stop the Cuts operate on Treaty 6, territory in the homeland of the Métis people. We strive to conduct our work in the spirit of the treaty by building respectful Indigenous settler relations and to take seriously our role as stewards of the land that sustains us. We believe that no project of environmental, social, or economic justice can be pursued or realized on these lands without recognition of and attention to treaty justice. The interconnectedness of injustices within the system guides us to think boldly about how to work towards treaty justice, honoring the spirit of the treaties and learning from the people and land in all that we do. It is in this spirit that we begin our webinar this evening. The Stand and Stop the Cuts also have a safe space policy that I'd like to make you aware of. At our meetings and events, we explicitly welcome people of all ethnicities, genders, abilities, and sexual orientations, languages, faiths, immigration statuses, and all other forms of human difference. We will not tolerate abuse, hatred, or disrespect on these or other grounds. We are committed to working out our conflicts or disagreements that may arise in a respectful manner, if any, and when they occur. So I'm going to turn it over to Kat to talk about our tech, and then we will talk about our discussion.
Hi everyone, my name is Kat Binder and I'm also a part of the board with the Stand. So I know this might look a little different for folks who have just been on Zoom meetings and not Zoom webinars, but as you can see, you'll only be able to see the panelists throughout the webinar. But if you do have questions, there is the Q&A option down at the below screen menu. And if you send in your questions there, we'll be sure to send those questions to the panelists and we'll get to them as the order they come in. There is also a raise hand option, which you can flag for us. But otherwise, it'll just be using that Q&A option. We are also recording this webinar, and that's partly why we chose to go with this webinar option. So we did need to seek permission from all the participants. So your privacy is protected in this recording. And you're also welcome to use the Q&A option anonymously. So if you do have any questions, you can certainly send a message via Q&A as well. I just had a question through the Q&A saying, can you see me? Again, no, we cannot. It's only the panelists that can be seen.
Okay, thank you. And so this webinar was kind of a thought was that we had just gone through, the province had just gone through 2 elections. We'd gone through a provincial election, we'd gone through municipal elections. And of course, because we live in Canada, we cannot help but be overwhelmed and bombarded with American elections and all of that, which influences the American state. And we thought it would be interesting to have a discussion about the role of elections and how they, impact on our daily lives, but also how activists and progressives in our community engage with elections, if at all. And, as a political scientist, I assumed everybody was fascinated by the ins and outs of elections in the same way that I am. But what you come to learn over time is that a lot of people feel that elections, will have meaning, really don't change that much. So we thought it might be interesting to convene a panel of prominent community activists who have been working in and through the system, against the system in some cases, and how they engage elections and how their organizations and how personally they're affected by these different events. So let me introduce our rather distinguished community activist panel. and I'm really excited to hear their thoughts on the questions we're about to ask. Tommy Ojo is from Black Lives Matter, prominent activist in our community. Jason Mercredi, the executive director of Prairie Harm Reduction. Barb Cape is the president of SEIU-West, and Tria Donaldson, for joining us from Regina, is a municipal elections organizer and works with the Canadian Union of Public Employees. And just before we start, I'm going to ask the first question. Just a reminder to be conscious of each other's time. We have about 3 to 5 minutes per question, but please feel free if someone says something that you'd like to respond to or raises different issues for you to raise your hand and I'll call on you. But for now, I know people are keen to hear what you have to say, and I want to stop talking because you are the stars of this show. Let me first ask the question to Tommy. Could you describe the issues that you're working to create change on, the actions or tactics you use to create that change, and the way in which an election or elections might play into your activism?
Thank you, Charles. So as Charles said, I am with Black Lives Matter YXC. We are a newer grassroots organization. And though Black Lives Matter as a movement started in 2013 with the death of Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old boy at the hands of George Zimmerman, it has since grown from just an organization to fight over policing and over incarceration of Black people. So our primary goal is racial justice, but we understand that racial justice is a multifaceted issue, and achieving racial justice is not just focusing on racial relations. To tackle racial justice, we need to tackle issues relating to decolonization, homophobia, transphobia, wealth disparity, harm reduction, homelessness, climate justice, sexism. Because Black Lives Matter at its heart is a no one left behind movement. We believe that none of us are fully liberated until we are all liberated, and we believe in justice for all at our very core. Our tactics to create change right now are limited due to the pandemic and winter. But right now we're doing a lot of online webinars such as this one, webinar seminars, and a lot of social media campaigns. We're trying to give platforms to people who usually aren't able to get the platforms. We're trying to educate people on what's going on in their community at a local level and at a national level. We believe in using education and building awareness to bring light to the situations we believe are important and to try and reach the most vulnerable populations and people who are usually left to the margins. And yeah, thank you.
Jason, can we turn it over to you?
Yeah, so with Prairie Harm Reduction, and we're a grassroots community-based nonprofit organization. We're an HIV, we're considered an AIDS service organization that is a harm reduction organization, and I've been with the organization since 2013. Originally, what brought me on was really how they treated people. We were a lot smaller back then, and I was on the front line. And our organization really believes people have the ability to make choices. They might not have all the information they need to make those choices, but regardless of the choice they make, we have to respect their choice because they're making it for a whole personal history of reasons. We deal with a lot of injustice. We deal with a lot of disparities within the community. We get to see under the Band-Aid, so to speak, that that often gets put on people that are marginalized, including people with addictions, people who are Indigenous, people with mental health issues, the homeless, and really it was probably a couple of years ago, but myself and Kayla, who's our associate director, and Julia, our director for support services, we kind of just got tired of seeing a lot of the social inequities in the province, and I thought there was a real leadership gap in terms of addressing some of them. And we thought that our organization was in a good spot that we could start doing some of those things. And so we really look at the day-to-day improving people's lives, but a big focus of ours is on really changing the way we do things in Saskatchewan and changing the way we deal with things like addictions in Saskatchewan. And we think we're at the forefront of what is possible, but we're just starting. Like, we have big plans for where we think this province could be. You know, and our hope is that we're going to pull everybody along with us. But at the end of the day, if you don't support us at this point, we don't really give a shit. We're going to do our thing, and we're going to push for social change. And we're done apologizing for people's uncomfortableness around things like addictions. It's not our job to appease people in power or people with privilege. It's our job to represent the people that we're there to represent, which is, you know, the people who access services with us and look out for their best interests. So that's basically what we do in a nutshell. We do a whole series of programming that I don't really need to get into. I'll probably answer through some of the questions. So thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Barb, over to you.
So good evening, everybody. I was smiling at the end of Jason's introduction because, you know, I from my perspective, from SEIU's perspective, we have reached a tipping point that I think, you know, apologizing or being embarrassed for being progressive or being an activist, I'm so done with that. I can't even begin to describe it. But you know, like Jason, we will get there. So SEIU-West is Service Employees International Union, and we are a union across Canada, the United States, and Puerto Rico. And, you know, the issues that you see in Regina, Saskatchewan, or Toronto, or Washington, DC, or San Juan are really all the same when you think about our membership. So the focus of our issues are really around the public service sectors. So, you know, the provision of public health care, education, community-based organizations. And the major focus for SEIU-West is improving the investment in these public services. And that, when we talk about that not only in improving the investment in terms of money, but also in terms of the human resources and the human capital that need to be done to do this work, because all of these sectors are hugely human intensive, whether it's the delivery of healthcare or the receiving of an education. It's hugely driven by the human factor. I think internationally as well, when I look south of the border for SEIU, you know, in Puerto Rico and the US, they have a different frame, and they have sort of a different focus in terms of, you know, a lot of their public services are really not public, they are private services. So for instance, things like healthcare, you know, even some of their education systems are far more privatized than ours are. But their focus is on, you know, driving services within this pandemic. And driving services means, you know, are we able to have the proper PPE to provide healthcare? Are we able to have the proper supports to, you know, make sure our kids are safe in the schools? Do we have dignity in our work? Do we have decent wages to do our work? And all of these things are how it relates to the Fight for 15 and a union, how it relates to healthcare and building personnel and to the education sector. So, you know, the tactics that we've been using and that, you know, our brothers and sisters all across the union have been focusing on educating and engaging not only our own members, but the public as well, to see why these issues that matter to SEIU-West members are really issues that everyone in the community can get behind and understand.
Thank you, Barb. Tria?
Okay, so much like Barb and my day job, I do a lot of work around public services and workers' rights. My background, though, is in a lot of like climate justice activism and racial justice activism. And a lot of the organizing I do is around building capacity. So working with QP and our locals and with community activists to help shape strategy to win campaigns. And so I've worked on a broad range of issues across Canada. I've been in Saskatchewan for about 6 years, and recently was doing a lot of work around the elections. And so I'm not sure what other people's experience are, but during the provincial election, I was staff. I was a Get Out the Vote organizer for a campaign in Regina, which lost. And then municipally, I was part of a group that was supporting candidates across the province. So we worked through the labor councils in the province to support candidates for both city council and for school board. I feel like we don't talk about school board issues as much when we're talking about our local elections, but for me and here in Regina, the school board was a huge driving factor in engagement. And that was because last year, the Regina School Board voted against a motion to recognize pride in schools. So we, that was like a huge mobilizing force here in Regina, and we unelected all of the 4 people that voted against the pride motion, and got like quite a few progressives in there, as well as and the Catholic School Board here. So I think working to get the right people elected is hugely important on whatever issue you are, but politicians don't do things out of the kindness of their heart. They do things because of public pressure. And so whatever working like issues and whatever tactics I'm always working to try to get good people elected, but then once their elections are over, we need to hold their feet to the fire. So there's like a broad range of issues that I'm interested in that I work on, but at the end of the day, it's about building the capacity and through education, as Barb said, mobilizing people to put pressure on our politicians so they stop being dicks. In general, or like be better. Yeah. We have a lot of bad politicians in Saskatchewan.
Thanks, Tria. I can tell already that this is, a panel of radical Democrats and activists and not academics, because you've used colorful language a lot that's appropriate. And the second is you've respected each other's time so well that you really don't need a time moderator, which of course is never true in academics. We have a question from the audience that I think I'd like to just throw out as it sort of relates to some of your comments, is that one commentator said that both elections in Saskatchewan have relatively low turnout. So the provincial election dropped below 40 or 50%. The municipal elections are quite a bit smaller. And someone asked if there was door-to-door canvassing programs within your organizations that try to reach out to people in the community, and they recognize that it's important that you're talking about social media, but many people that you might represent are not on social media. So what is the plan to actually engage with the people of Saskatchewan? That's a big question, but it's definitely one that I'm sure all of you have thought about in different ways. I know Tommy mentioned education. I think Jason, you do a lot of media, as you do Tria as well, and Barb. I'm just curious if that's something that your organizations have to deal with on a regular basis.
I have a little to say about that, but BLM-YXC is a younger organization. We're actually only a few months old. We were born out of the momentum that came just a few months ago here. But my input on that is that this year over the election, we had a lot of things going on. We had COVID going on. The weather was an issue as well. And I think there's a lot of fear going around right now related to elections, and a lot of uncertainty and distrust in the system. I think a lot of people have lost faith in the system, and that loss of faith paired with COVID issues, weather, mobility, just a lot of people probably didn't want to make the effort to come out and vote. But I think the way around that is that we need to meet people where we are at. And while this year we were not able to do that, because again, we are a younger organization run by a lot of young people who do have school and work to think about. I think the future of that is door-to-door canvassing and reaching out to the people that regular electoral door-to-door canvassing does not get to. I think we can put more effort into helping people experiencing homelessness vote, because I know that's an issue that the Lighthouse is dealing with. A lot of them don't have identification, and there is a system in place where they can find someone to vouch for them, but that is also flawed because you can only vouch for one person, and there is like mobility issues. I know last year the polling station was really far away from the Lighthouse and they had to bus people over. Also, with apart from people experiencing homelessness, there's also incarcerated people. Now they can vote in the provincial election, not the local elections, but it is difficult for them to find information on the candidates that they are voting for. It's difficult for them to have access to the platform. So I think reaching out to vulnerable communities like that, these are just some examples that came to mind right off the bat. There are a lot of more people that we should be thinking about and that aren't being thought about right now. I think also having, let's say, when in a post-COVID world, say, cookouts in neighborhoods that aren't usually canvassed widely, having community gatherings where it is more laid back, but then there's a sense of periodical, hey, this is what's going on in our city right now. If you want more information, here's how you can get it. And just letting people know that they have the access to resources that can help them vote if they want to, I think is really important, because a lot of people do want to vote, but they, let's say if they're a new immigrant, they don't know how, they don't know if they're eligible, if they're a permanent resident, they don't know how to become eligible if they're not eligible, they don't know who is voting, where to find platforms. Issues like that, I think, are important in making sure people who are usually left to the margins are able to vote in elections.
Thanks, Tommy. Would anybody else like to answer that question?
Yeah, I think you have to inspire people to get them wanting to vote in the first place, and that takes place long before a get out the vote effort takes place. And if you're not inspiring people, you're going to see low voter turnout. And so, I think we need some pretty dynamic leadership, aggressively advocating for social issues. But I think if you're not inspiring people, they're not going to get involved. And I think when you're looking at marginalized populations, it's no different. If they don't feel like you have their back, and that gets proven month over month, year over year before an election, they're not going to come out for you. They're not going to volunteer. They're not going to mobilize their community. And so, I think you have to really show, and I think you could point to a couple candidates that did that really well, where they knew the election wasn't going to be won on election day. And so they went out hard way ahead of time, just even in terms of community engagement with all the various stakeholders. And then I think you could look at a couple candidates didn't, and some of them lost and some of them was tight. And, but at the same time, get out the vote is very important. You need community getting out all the time and hustling, but that shouldn't be a startup. It should be there already to go and implemented way ahead of time. And I think, we're seeing that not take place. And even on the far right movements, you're seeing it take place. They knew that that Buffalo Party knew that the get out the vote effort needed to go down way beforehand. They were doing way more homework on community mobilization in certain ridings years out before they even were a party. And so I think you need to, there's lessons to be learned from that type of movement. As tough as it is, they did their homework and got their community riled up on certain issues. And I think we need to do the same if we're going to see any sort of positive impacts.
Thanks, Jason. Barb or Tria, would you like to tackle that question also?
Yes. So I think a few things. I really like what Jason was saying around needing to build relationships before elections. And I think this is often something that politicians or political parties or unions forget sometimes, is that you don't make friends the day you're moving, because they're not going to help you move, right? Part of building those relationships, it's like a long-term investment in building community and relationships with community. And part of that is showing up for people, not just when you want something too. And I think a lot of times our movements are like that we only ask when we need something instead of being there for people. So that's, I think, one thing. And a tactic that is used in a lot of cases is called deep canvassing. So it kind of is what I think Vita asked this question. So not just canvassing during an election, but like going and asking people what their concerns are and then mobilizing around those concerns. And so there's lots of great examples of where that's happened and where that's been very successful. So I think that kind of engagement is something we need to be doing. But the other thing I just kind of wanted to chat about was like that voter turnout piece. So I was doing Get Out the Vote. That was my job for the provincial election. And the riding I was working on, we had like, we use a system called You Identify Mark. So you identify your supporters. So you're trying to get, go out, talk to people so you know who your supporters are, and then you're trying to get them to the poll. So on election day, we had 2,000 votes that we were going to poll. And we only had 400 people vote. 400 of our people vote that day. So we had over 1,600 people that we had identified as supporters who didn't come out to the polls to support us. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But at the end of the day, we lost by only 400 votes in that one riding. And so that turnout question is a huge piece of that we have to crack. But part of it, I think, is very much to what both Jason and Tommy were saying around needing to engage and inspire people, but also overcome the challenges people have with getting to the polls and the distrust they have about politicians. And in general, people that vote more progressively are less likely to vote. So that voter turnout piece is something that we really need to tackle if we want to see big changes at the polling stations or politicians.
I want to jump in here because I think, I don't disagree with anything that Tommy or Jason or Tria is saying, but I think that you guys are about 3 chess moves ahead of the rest of the population, 3, 6, 12 chess moves ahead. And I don't say this to be, I'm not looking to pick a fight, but we have absolutely dropped the ball when it comes to educating the public and hell, even our own membership about why politics actually matters to people. We have some, wonderful, fanciful notion that back in the day, people were way more engaged. Well, no, they weren't. There just wasn't anything to do back in the 50s and 60s. So people read the paper and watched the news and, date night was going to vote. But today, there are so many distractions that people are focusing on in their personal lives. And we have to, as progressive organizations, cut through that noise and that bullshit and remind people why politics actually matters to them. Go down to the simple stuff. Do you like clean water? Get out and vote. Your politician isn't, changing your collective agreement. Get out and vote. Politicians are not responding to the opioid crisis in this province. We need to educate people about why they need to give a damn and get out and vote. And then the engagement happens, and then meeting people where they are, and then pulling those marks. That's when the that intricate work happens. But it's from my perspective, we progressive organizations and ours included make the assumption that when we say something, people will just automatically agree with us and understand, and they don't. That's the sad fact. They don't. And so it's up to us to educate, our allies and our partners about why this stuff matters.
Thanks, Barb. I take it you've been watching the Queen's Gambit. Just a guess. I don't know if that it was the chess analogy. I just assumed you had watched the. So we have had some prepared questions, but the audience is asking some really good ones. So I thought maybe I could throw those out and keep as a way to keep the audience engaged and try and address some of their questions, and some really good ones here. And I think in some ways you've all spoken to some of these issues, but thought maybe you could elaborate. So one of the things I think is true is that a lot of organizations, especially on the sort of progressive, maybe anti-conservative movements, seem to get frustrated with the system just not working. Even when you get friends in office, sometimes they don't act like your friends when they have power. And one person has said, well, listen, that's understandable, but it's dangerous. Is one of the issues the limitations of party politics? For example, are radical policies not making it to sort of party convention floors or union convention floors? How can social justice groups get around those limitations, in your opinions? And one comment that I just thought maybe you want to hear is that, and I think this comes from Jason's comment, is that the Buffalo Party had a lot of money behind them. We will never have that, likely never. But yeah, I get that we should go ahead with campaigns. And by the way, they give Buffalo a bad name, which I thought was important for us to raise. But I just back to the idea that the institutions that especially at the provincial and federal level, the parties we vote for sometimes, even the ones that are sort of called our friends, kind of let us down. How do you engage with that as activists and people who, even when you win, sometimes you kind of you lose? And maybe we'll start with Jason for this round.
Yeah, so I think, so a couple of things. I want to really quickly say about the Buffalo Party thing with the money. I think using money and people's ability to have money as an excuse is a cop-out. We got zero money for what we're doing, and we're still able to mobilize the community. Granted, I'm working disgusting hours and have no social life, but you can make up for the lack of money in certain aspects. You're never going to be able to duplicate it, so you got to figure out what skills you do have and then utilize that. And so if we don't got money, maybe we've got people, maybe we've got messaging. Memes are free, like if we were joking about before, like our social media presence, like that's a free way for us to engage the public, and we do a pretty good job with that as an organization. But in terms of with politicians, I think you should not be coming to them with a bouquet of asks. They got a lot of competing priorities. They got a lot of stuff they got to keep their hands on. You need to be really clear with your asks. And by asks, I mean ask. You should be able to boil down whatever you're going after in one thing. And yes, there's a bunch of things we need to accomplish. But when you're talking about policy, that takes a lot of time and energy. When you're talking about real social change, that takes a lot of time and energy. It's our job to mobilize and get the community mobilized and that type of thing. But when you're going to an elected official, you should be really clear about the one thing you want from them at that point in time. And then you're going to have to make adjustments from them. And the one nice part about when you have a clear message is you can wear them down. Like I use the analogy from wrestling, which is you take them into deep waters. So you take them to places they don't want to go, and you just grind it out with them on that one ask until you get what you want. Eventually you're going to get what you want. And if you aren't, they're going to just get sick of hearing it from you. So they're going to start to give in, and the other part is you're going to get good community saturation for whatever point you're trying to make. So like with the opioid crisis, we have been hammering that for a while now, but we're starting to see saturation within the wider public around just understanding of what the opioid crisis is, so that when we're presenting on it, I don't have to waste the minimal amount of time I have, because 5 minutes is tight, 3 minutes is tight, like those sound bites are tight. If the public doesn't understand what I'm talking about, I'm having to educate them while explaining the complications and the reason why I need the ask. That's way too much for the public to understand. We need to educate them ahead of time so that when you're going to the ask, they understand the ask, and then they can buy into the ask and then start calling their politicians. I was getting text messages from people that were very outside of my political sphere telling me that they were contacting very high-level politicians during the election campaign about the opioid crisis. These are people that I would have dinner with, and they would have no fucking clue what I was talking about. But because we had that consistent messaging going out, and we made our clear one ask, fund the consumption site, we got plenty of asks after that, but right now it's fund the consumption site. That's our hammered point. Every movement should have one ask that you're trying to get. After that, right into the next one. Don't give them any, when I say taking them into deep waters, don't give them any air. You get that ask, you keep going to the next one. And then that war of attrition that often happens with progressive movements, where elected leaders just try to wait you out, isn't going to happen, because they realize you're not getting tired. So just keep busy, keep active, and don't give up. But you need to be crystal clear on your ask.
Thanks, Jason. Barb, same question to you, and maybe if I could just add, do you struggle as a labor leader knowing that your members may not always agree with you politically, and like how do you navigate those waters?
Well, there's a couple of things, and so I'm going to break it up into two pieces. So, you know, the idea that, you know, our friends who we help get elected don't always respond to, you know, our needs. You know, I think Jason, you make a hell of an organizer, because the labor movement is pretty good about many asks. So we need to, you know, boil it down to one consistent message. And, you know, when our friends, with air quotes, don't do what we ask them to do, then we need to hammer them. We need to stay on them. We need to explain to them that this is in their best interest, because we represent a huge portion of the population, and this is what's good for a huge portion of the population. So if it's good for the population, it's good for a politician. Tria makes a great point. Politicians don't do things because out of the goodness of their heart. And as a labor leader, you know, the struggle that some of my members don't agree with me, you know, it's a struggle that I'm willing to have, because if you have a homogenous union, if you don't have debate within the union, then you're not really doing your job in terms of educating people and giving them the space and sort of giving them the runway to actually take off and be those activists that you know that they can be. So, I mean, disagreement is fair, and just, you know, disputes about my political perspective or where I might be taking the union in terms of politics, that's absolutely fair game. But ultimately, the question that you have to ask yourself is, for a union, is, am I doing this for the good of my members? Will my members benefit from this? And if you can answer yes to that, even if my friend doesn't agree with me, if you can answer yes to that, then I think you're doing the right thing.
Thanks, Barb. Tria, and then Tommy.
So I think one of the things the left is not as good as we should be is celebrating when we do have victories. And I think that can lead to like this assumption that like what we're doing or like electoral politics doesn't really work. And I think we need to do that more, is like actually celebrate when we have wins and make a difference. And so one of the things that, sorry, my dog has really wants a toy that is stuck behind a chair. Like just recently, so we just elected a new city council in Regina. The first meeting they had, they struck a committee to look at harm reduction and looking at the upstream impacts that go into homelessness. So that was like at their first meeting. And so like having the right people matters, but also celebrating when we have wins. And the other thing I just want to mention, I'm from BC. So a lot of my examples are like in the BC context, but BC's been having huge struggles with the opioid crisis and overdoses. And recently the mayor, so the progressive mayor that a lot of people weren't happy with because he wasn't making movement as fast, just decriminalized drug possession in Vancouver. Which is pretty awesome. And so that was because of the work of grassroots folks keeping pressure on him and keeping hammering because they weren't happy with the action he was taking. So I think that first is like knowing what the pressure points and how to apply pressure are to the decision makers is like a big piece of it, but also just like not giving up and like hammering our friends as much. But like, you know, we can achieve cool things when we try through politics. And I think like pointing that out so folks that are disillusioned can see that. And like, you know, having a new democratic government makes a huge difference, looking at how BC is handling something like the pandemic versus us. And also the approval rating. So the BC government right now is the most popular, and the further right the governments go right now in terms of dealing with the pandemic, the least popular they are. So it's interesting times. Anyway, that was all over the place.
Thanks, Tria. Tommy?
There's a lot that has been said, so I'm going to try and reply to the bits and pieces that jumped out to me. I agree with what Jason said that about having to hammer politicians over the head with the same issue over and over again, because they're not just going to listen one time. They're not just going to listen. They're not going to listen the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th, upteenth time. So I think it's really important that we stick to our guns and know what we want and don't stop till we get it. But I also think that activism truly starts at home, because we can do all we want with politicians, but if the general public, again, doesn't know that the issues that we're fighting for even exist, when we come at them and we're all like guns ablazing and we're upset, we're tired of not being heard of, they will feel disillusioned. They'll feel like we're coming on too strong because they haven't seen the fight up until now. So I think it's really important as progressives to, while we are going for the harder stuff and finding politicians and trying to get our motions passed, I think it's really important to encourage people to have these talks around the supper table. And it is really hard, I think, in Saskatchewan, because I think there's a political divide across generations. I know even just like growing up in Saskatchewan, I have friends I can't visit because their grandparents are racist or whatever reason. So I think while we're going in that direction, we need to make people understand that this is not a new fight. This is not something that started this year. The BLM movement is not something that started this year. This is something that's been going on for years. And our anger, our like exhaustion is valid with everything that's been going on over these years. I remember we had to speak, so I think it was a magazine, and they wanted BLM to talk about how BLM had created awareness for Black people and given us a platform to speak our mind, and they want us to put this positive spin on it, but that's just not true. That's not the crux of, that's not what the situation is. But the fact that they thought that was something that was okay to ask of us is an issue. So I think helping even the community understand that this is not a new fight, that this anger is not coming out of nowhere. We're not just upset, and we're not just yelling, we're not just posting our angry memes just to be shitty, that we are actually coming from a place of deep hurt and tiredness, and I can't think of the word, but yeah, I think that's all I have right now.
Thanks, Tommy. We've had a couple of questions. I think they've been addressed. So if they haven't, please feel free to ask it again around building like fighting organizations and how we mobilize and fight for that change. And I think that's been addressed, so I won't ask that again. But if there is something you'd like to add, please feel free to ask it in again or in a different way. A couple of questions dealing with the parallels on the right and left. And I know sometimes that's difficult to navigate, although in Saskatchewan, perhaps not, because the right seems so powerful in this province in comparison to, you know, the left. And I use that term loosely because obviously the left is not one homogenous thing. But one question that I guess nor is the right. But one question or two questions that came in that maybe I can group together is that, you know, why do you think progressives are less likely to vote than conservatives? Or do you just think we are dealing in a province that is really this conservative? And then how do we navigate the political terrain in a province that 60% of the electorate and both at the federal and provincial level seem pretty comfortable voting on the right? And, you know, one other question that's similar, I think, is why does a party in this place, the Sask party, how does it manage to hold on to such a big component of the voters in your mind in a way that when they don't seem to want to act on the big questions of our time, and, you know, we could think about, you know, harm reduction or, you know, wages or good jobs or the environment, and yet we have to navigate in terrain where that is sometimes ignored, pushed aside, and in some cases lied to. You know, how do we navigate in that terrain, I guess, would be if I could summarize a couple of those questions. And maybe here we'll start with Barb and then move to Tria, Tommy, and finally to Jason.
Seriously, man, I don't even know how you grouped all those together and put them into one question to me. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Barb.
So I'm going to start, and then I'm going to get you to refresh my memory on the second part of the question. you talked about progressives not voting, and you know, sometimes as progressives, and someone might throw a virtual shoe at me for this, but we have some sort of a privilege or a belief that, you know, we are on the right side of an issue, and so the people will just come along, and that's not how life works. We need to, you know, all of us have talked about, you know, the foundational pieces of educating, mobilizing and organizing and engaging in order to get people, whether they're progressives or not, to get out the vote. So it is that foundational stuff that we need to do more of. And we have to shake ourselves out of this notion that we are on the right side of history, so people will just come along. That's not how it works. You got to take them by the hand. You got to lead them down the path. You got to get them to the polls. And so it starts from step one and takes them all the way to the actual voting. Progressives not voting or conservatives not voting, it's because they have to find something in it for them in order to make them get off their chairs and get out of their houses to vote. Now, what the heck was the second part of your question?
Well, how do you find, I think because we live in, I think it's safe to say that Saskatchewan right now is a pretty conservative place. The conservative movement, if I can put it in that broad term, it seems quite hegemonic in the sense that, you know, they have like a 60% wall of support, and, you know, can kind of get away with anything these days. And the electorate seems to reward that, even though they do some really horrible things like, you know, ignore organizations like Tommy's and Jason's, or, give you zeros in your contracts over the next 4 years, and like do these really leave you without a contract for 4 years. Just things that, you know, are just really horrible, and yet they get these massive majorities. And that's a tough, I think, response, right? I think we probably get demoralized by that. I'm just curious how you respond and navigate that terrain.
You know, I like to think that there was a time where Saskatchewan was incredibly progressive, but that was a time when we all had that co-reliance on each other for our very survival. As we've urbanized, as we've moved away from the rural communities, that loss has really, that feeling has not translated well. As we've all urbanized into the cities, as we've left the small towns, that community feeling is no longer there. So we have this wonderful memory of Saskatchewan as this progressive, supportive province, but we're evolving, and we are buttressed on both sides by very right-wing governments, very right-wing ideologies, and we have not fought back hard enough as progressives in order to build that little island within this sea of right-wing conservatism. But how do you deal with that? Well, you know, Jason talked earlier about, you know, he was just pissed off and done with being lied to by the politicians. So we started calling them out. And that's what we need to be doing. When they are lying to you, when they are disrespecting you, you need to call it out for what it is, whether it's racist behavior, whether it's sexist or misogynistic, whether it's divisive. You need to call it out and not be embarrassed for calling it out, because that shit can't stand. That should not be allowed to be a part of our regular discourse. South of the border, they can have that. They can be as divided and as bizarre as they want to be. In this island, that is Saskatchewan, this stops now. And as progressives, we need to support each other in doing that.
Thanks, Barb. Tria?
So I have lots of thoughts, always do. First, I have the privilege with my job to be able to do a lot of polling work and focus group work in Saskatchewan. And one of the things that is unique in Saskatchewan across the country is that the average Saskatchewan people, so when we're talking about polling, very much support progressive cause, whether that's taking action on climate change or like funding our healthcare system, not privatizing long-term care, like all of these issues. Like whenever we're do polling on issues, we're polling around like above between 50 and 80%. depending on the issue. But I like to think of it as a gap between values and voting intention, right? And like when you look at something like the library, so in 2017, when the Sask Party government had the horrible austerity budget and had lots of cuts, the cuts to libraries were massively unpopular, and people in Saskatchewan mobilized in an unprecedented way against that. And I got a lot of hope from that, but it's also something that people then like wasn't a ballot issue when they come across it. And I think something that this government is very good at is stepping back from shitty ideas. So even with like the back to school plan this fall, when there was like a lot of outrage about it, and it wasn't perfect, but they changed just enough that people think that they're being reasonable. So like I know people in rural Saskatchewan who are like, yeah, I totally like support everything the NDP does, but like, you know, the Sask Party is really reasonable, and like the NDP shut down hospitals in the 80s, and I just don't trust them, right? So the NDP hasn't overcome this like gap between like the shitty things they've done in the past when they were pushing for austerity, so people don't trust them. They haven't done anything to rebuild that trust, really. But like in general, like I get a lot of hope around this idea that the people of Saskatchewan still do hold a lot of those values that Barb was saying that they don't. But like I spend a lot of my time doing organizing in rural Saskatchewan, and have seen some incredible organizing and care like it done in those ways. Like there's still huge issues, especially racism. Like I'm Indigenous, and like a lot of the organizing recently like in Saskatchewan that has been really motivating to me too is like the stuff with the Justice for Our Stolen Children camp and things like that. And like a lot of that was like people all over the province coming into the camps and like having conversations about colonialism and racism and the impact. So I think there is like a lot of cool stuff happening across the province in ways and places we don't necessarily see. So that gives me hope. And then but like around the piece around like progressives voting and stuff like that, like I think, like as I said, like people aren't necessarily making the connection between the things that they care about and the politicians and like the difference. But in general, I think we saw a lot more successes at the local government level this time. So we saw Sask Party candidates run for mayor in several cities. So Saskatoon and Prince Albert, we had a former Sask Party MLA run. They both got defeated. We had progressives win on city council in PA. 3 out of the 4 progressives that ran in Prince Albert won, even though we lost both of the seats there provincially. We had QP members get elected in Warman and Martinsville and like small towns in North Battleford. So I think there's like a lot of room to have wins in the next 4 years, even though it might seem very depressing right now.
Can I ask you a quick question on that? There's an audience question on whether or not you think focusing municipally is important given like how much control the province has. And I thought maybe that might be a good segue just to address that question too, Tria, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I think like first off, the province and the federal government have downloaded a lot of responsibilities onto municipalities. So things like housing policy, public services, clean water, all of these things have an impact. Police budgets. When we're talking about Black Lives Matter, our municipal governments have a huge impact on that. Janine, who ran for city council, is an SEIU-West member who ran for city council, like ran on a platform talking about harm reduction and safe injection sites. Like we elected a councillor in Regina whose platform was defund the police, which is like pretty awesome. And if they can actually have those wins and people can see that it's not so radical to like have a climate action plan for Regina, and that so they can see that those ones are possible, I think it will also hopefully give it a little more courage to the NDP to actually have some visionary policies also.
Thanks, Tria. Thanks for jumping on that second question. I appreciate it. Tommy and then Jason.
All right, so the first question was, why are progressives less likely to vote than conservatives? If I'm correctly, yes. if I remember correctly. Well, I do remember correctly because I wrote them down because I knew I wouldn't remember them.
Thank you for doing that. My memory probably would forget too.
Of course. So I think one of the reasons, at least that I've seen, that progressives are less likely to vote is the fear of not being heard. We feel like we're doing all this work, we're doing all this canvassing, and we're not getting any support. I know a lot of the younger generation are progressive, and we don't see, there's a lot of new ideas being thrown around, again, to do with defunding the police and climate justice. There's a lot of stuff that the younger community cares about, but we don't feel represented. I remember I had a SAS party, I think they were all canvassers, like call me, and I asked them questions to do with issues that are part of the zeitgeist of the time right now, issues to do with defunding the police, climate justice, harm reduction, people experiencing homelessness, and they had nothing to offer me for that. They just had no answers. I asked them about climate change, and they said, oh, well, Scott Moe is going to fix the economy and make more jobs. And while there are people who care about that, that was not the question that I asked. I asked you about climate change. And it wasn't that they had an unsatisfactory answer or I disagreed with their answer. There was nothing. I asked, is there anything on your paper to do with any of the issues I have mentioned to you right now? And there was nothing. So I think a lot of progressives don't feel that their vote matters. And I think that's why they're not getting out to vote. And I think the way, and I'm actually not sure how to get around that right now, but I think we need to continue putting pressure on our politicians to speak on these issues. We need, like Jason has said repeatedly, we need to keep, like Flintstone style, like hammering them over the head with a club about these issues, because I just found it bizarre and ridiculous that they had nothing to tell me on those issues. And those are the issues that a lot of progressives care about now. A lot of more conservative people do care about the economy and do care about small businesses. They care about keeping their taxes low, but that is no longer the only issues that are important right now. And I know Barb said that politicians don't do things out of the kindness of their heart, but I think some people also do not just vote out of the kindness of their heart, because there are people who we have to convince people experiencing homelessness, like humanity. We have to convince people that people experiencing homelessness, people like dealing with addiction, incarcerated people, we have to convince people that they deserve rights and that they deserve the same things that they have been afforded before we are able to move forward with even explaining our platform to them or trying to get them on board with what we believe in. And I think that is very emotionally taxing. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of involvement, and I think that emotional exhaustion is something that weighs on progressives a lot. At least I know myself personally, the week that Eric Garner was murdered, I was doing a lot of work on social media trying to talk to people about what was going on. I had a lot of people messaging me about this specific issue and trying to talk to everyone and reach them where they were at and trying to relate to them and put my heart into it so I could bring them to a place where they could understand where I was coming from. Completely exhausted me in that week, and I was out for the count for 2 weeks. I couldn't get out of bed for a few days just because of the emotional exhaustion of trying to convince other people that marginalized people deserve rights, period, no matter what, that just by the virtue of you being a human and being alive, you deserve certain things to help you stay alive. And I think that ties into the SAS party continuing to hold power despite them not representing the people anymore. I think a lot of people are very used to the SAS party. It's called the Saskatchewan Party. It's named after the province. It's familiar, and I think this is a time that is filled with a lot of fear and a lot of polarization that is rising specifically out of the American election. I think people are drawing strict binaries between left and right, and there are certain buzzwords that once we say them, people write us off. Like, if you like trying to talk to someone about racial justice, and if you mention Black Lives Matter, oh, that's a buzzword and I don't want to hear anything to do with that. I don't want to listen to anything to do with that. That is a territory I don't want to hear about. I think there's a lot of issues like that where people just don't want to hear about them because they've been told that it'll cost a lot of money, or they don't believe that people experiencing homelessness deserve the same rights that they do. They don't believe incarcerated people deserve the same rights as they do. There is obviously racial prejudice that falls into that. Living in Saskatchewan has been a trip. I moved here from Toronto about 9 years ago, and just the anti-Indigenous racism is terrifying here. Just hearing, I heard a lot of stuff about not going to certain parts of town, or people believing that the reason that some reserves were underfunded were because of the people on reserve and not because of systematic issues that were causing them to not be able to take care of themselves. So I think it has a lot to do with people, with the polarization. First of all, I think there's a lot of polarization, and I think it's a familiarity thing. People are afraid of what these issues might hold. They're afraid of what these issues might mean for their livelihoods. They're afraid of how it's going to change their way of life, their income, how they're able to take care of their family. And I think it's important to educate people on how funding the safe consumption site, for example, will not take away from them. It will not take away from how their small business is working. It will not take away from how they're able to provide for their family, or how their personal liberties. And I think it comes just down to that. People are really afraid right now. And yeah. Sorry,
Thank you for those comments. Thank you. And that's a good segue for Jason, I think. Oh, and then and I see Tria has her hand up, so we'll come back.
Yeah, I basically ditto. Like I think when you're looking at the left, for instance, or the NDP, they got oligarchs just like the right does. And the narrative and the agenda is dominated by the blue hairs. And we don't have, like, I think harm reduction, NDP's come out in support of that, whatever, but I think, like, for the most part, you need to go aggressive. People need to know what you stand for. And like, even our agency, like, we have support across both sides of the aisle. People just want to know where you fit, and they want clear messaging on that. And I don't think we really get that often out of either the SAS party or the NDP. Like, people also want to know how whatever you're pitching applies to them. That's all they want to know. And you need to be really clear in that. And it goes back to what I was saying before, is you have to be clear on that, and you have to be able to articulate that. And if you, that famous saying of, if you can't explain it simply, you can't explain it at all. Like, same thing goes back for political messaging. Like, you shouldn't need a 15-minute stump speech to explain your platform. You should honestly be able to do that in 3 sentences. But we often get caught up in trying to over-explain an issue or over-involve. People just want to know how it applies to them. And so I think when we're looking at that, we need to stop letting the narrative be dictated by people. Like, so for instance, in the NDP, the narrative is being dictated by people who are fucking losers, to be honest. Like, we've lost how many elections? Like, why are we listening to these people? It's the same mindset when it comes to the overdose crisis. Our approach isn't working. So you need to change your approach. If your approach is not winning you things, then you need to change your approach. Like, the way I look at this stuff is, it's like if I was running a basketball team and my offense kept getting snubbed, I wouldn't then say the problem is the system that I'm playing in. You fucking knew the rules when you got on the court. You need to adapt your offense and adapt your defense so that you're effective in getting you the victory. But what we see a lot of times is people clinging to offenses that worked 20 years ago. I think 20 years ago now, sports has changed, politics have changed. So you need to change and adapt your approach. And I feel like more and more you have up and coming leaders who are hungry hungry for things. Like Regina City Council is a great one, you know, where you have hungry leaders, or Larange Town Council. Larange elected, as my nephew put it, my family's from Larange, as my nephew put it, Larange elected a gay buff guy, and that is so cool. And like they in Larange, conservative Larange, where the last town council was basically doing land trade deals for minimal amounts of money with their family, they elected a very progressive town council. So that's in a very, very conservative town. The town, I know they always elect NDP, but they're still a conservative town. They elected left-leaning civic government. And so people want to know that there's another option. They want to know what it stands for. And there's a lot of young leaders that are ready to take the challenge, but you can't muffle them. Like you cannot muffle the young leaders. They're done waiting. This wait your turn shit is over. Like we need to be acting fast, and we need to be acting now and keeping up with the social movements of the time, because I don't think it should be up to us to explain to left-leaning people. And I'm not even talking about elected officials. I'm talking literally about the oligarchs, like the people that run things behind the scenes. I don't give a fuck if you think it's digestible or not. There's an appetite for it in the community. The people that you're polling, I've never done a poll in my entire life. I've been voting age for almost 20 years now. Like the people that you're polling are not the people anymore. It's those systems are outdated, you know. And Charlie Clark's a great example. In his first election, he was getting crushed in the polls, but then he won the election. And then same thing now, they were trying to spin this narrative of as if Charlie Clark was going to get destroyed on election night, and he ate them all for lunch. And so you can't tell me that the systems and the ways that we're doing things are working when they're clearly not. And so it goes back to that. If your attack offense is not getting you points on the board, you need to change your attack offense. And a lot of the times what ends up happening is if you aren't getting points on the board, you have to get really aggressive to do that. And you have to make it if you can't win a clean game, you got to win a dirty game. Whatever it is, you got to win. And so but what we're seeing right now is this is how you do this, and we're going to implement the game plan. Well, the game plan's fucking broke.
That was like the best sport analogy. I don't like this at all, but like that was just like very well sport analogy. I just wanted to quickly add on like Tommy's point, and also on Jason's, like I just like quickly looked through the faces of everyone that's like cabinet ministers of the governor of Saskatchewan, and they're all hella old and they're all white. And one of the issues that we need to figure out as progressives in Saskatchewan is like how to actually address racism, because we lost a number of seats this election because of racism. So in Coronation Park, Regina Pasqua, Regina, I think it was Eastview with Malik. Racism is a huge issue, and it's like something that folks face on the doorsteps, and people aren't going to trust politicians that don't look like them and don't have the same life experience and issues as they are. And right now we're electing the same type of people over and over again, and it's failing. And so one of the things, like my friend Tony Head, who was just elected in Prince Albert, he took a lot of encouraging to run because he didn't think that an Indigenous person could get elected in Prince Albert because of the racism he faced every day. And he faced it on the doorstep when he was door knocking. Our queer candidate that ran for school board in Regina faced it on the doorstep. So that's like something that we need to really deal with, is we need to make sure that we're supporting people of color, queer people, and people from marginalized backgrounds to run and get elected, because that's one of the only ways we're actually going to change and gets a government that's really putting those issues forward because they understand them. But we're not going to do that unless we're supporting those people and running and having those difficult conversations on the doorstep too. Because like Tommy, it shouldn't be up just to you to have those conversations about why Black Lives Matter, right? Like all the white people on this call, which I assume is probably the most of you, like it's your guys' responsibility to also be doing that work. And it will make it easier on all of us, but also when we're asking folks of color to run, that's a huge sacrifice for people to make when they're facing racism. And as allies, you guys need to be stepping up and having those conversations and protecting people of color.
Do we have time for me to add on to that a little bit?
Of course.
Thank you for bringing that up, Tria. I agree that having to tell people that I exist and I matter as a baseline every time I'm trying to speak as an issue, it gets pretty tiring. It gets really frustrating to think of having to protect myself just by the virtue of who I am from like harm just because I want to see change in the world. I think it's really important that white allies, apart from educating themselves, also use themselves as a physical and, well, not physical because we're all online right now, but like in any way, just use yourself as a shield for your black friends and like the black people around you who are fighting for change. I think that in Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan had the biggest faction of the KKK in Canada back in the day, and it's still visible today. We still see the Confederate flags. We still see people just hurling slurs, and I think one thing that we need to be more aggressive about, and one thing we need to be zero tolerance about, is racism. And I think that when we see little things happening, when we have a politician say something that it doesn't sit right with us, or when we see little bouts of racism in the community, I think that needs to be a kill it with fire type thing. I think starting from the root of the problem is also important, because again, a lot of people in Saskatchewan who are voting for racist politicians or who are still racist, it's something that they have grown up with and something they have been taught. It's not something that is intrinsic to them. Racism is never intrinsic. It is taught, it is fear, it is learned. And I think helping people deal with that fear and taking that away is really important at the baseline, because there is a lot of us versus them mentality when it comes to race. There is a lot of, oh, this person is coming here and this place is mine and they're taking something from me. And it's not like that, because first of all, it's probably not your place. If you're not Indigenous, this is not your land. Like, get that out of your head. No one is taking anything from you because it is not yours to be taken from. I think we need to help people understand that, I don't know, man, I'm just so fucking sick of racism. And I think it just, I don't even know how to begin speaking on it more. I don't know what else to say that hasn't already been said, that I haven't already said. I haven't already been saying for the past like 7 years. I don't know what else to bring to the table, because I've tried being a voice of reason. I've been that angry Black person. I've tried every angle at it. And I think just like that zero tolerance and making racists afraid again, I think that should be our motto for 2020, make racists afraid again, because there needs to be very specific and very weighted consequences for issues of that sort. And I think also holding our government responsible for issues to do with, for example, missing and murdered Indigenous women. I was looking at Charlie Clark's platform, and he says he's doing stuff to address the calls to actions for missing and murdered Indigenous women. But that came out like 2 years ago, and I haven't seen anyone in the city, provincial or national level doing anything concrete that the calls to actions have asked us to do, to work towards reconciliation and to work towards a society that protects Indigenous women and girls and protects Indigenous people as a whole and people of color as a whole. I think people often forget that Canada is a country of immigrants if you're not Indigenous. That diversity is where our power lies, and pushing someone aside or refusing to listen to someone or disregarding someone because of something as mundane as the color of their skin is just straight up, it's just lame, and we're not gonna move forward like that, in that sense. And that's why I think it's so important that I think Jagmeet Singh is really important right now, because he's a visible person of color, and he is open with his culture, he is proud of his heritage, and he is gaining traction in this country. And though the NDP, as Jason said, are kind of losers right now. I think it's great for people to see that he exists, he's doing the damn thing, and he is relating to people and meeting them where they are at, from what I've seen.
Thank you for those extremely important, powerful comments. One of the questions that keeps coming up, and I just want to make sure we cover it and just sort of get a sense of it, and maybe I can package. And Barb, I guess I'm going to be guilty of packaging again. So bear with me. Maybe get your pencils out so I can write this down. No, but I'm kidding. But someone has asked a couple times that I think it's an important one, just for the general theme of tonight, is, do elections matter? And I guess to add to that is, we focused a lot tonight on the Sask party and the NDP. I mean, should we be looking at other parties like the Greens? Someone mentioned the Greens have covered some of these issues in their platform, maybe all of these issues in their platform. Is that something we should be looking at? And or is there ways that progressives need to engage during elections that maybe hasn't been raised yet tonight? I know we've raised a lot of issues, and I don't want to have to repeat them, but if there's something that you've thought of or that maybe could come up that might work within this dialogue, maybe please feel free to share it with us as well. So I hope that covers some of the audience's questions and hopefully adds a few other new questions for the panel. And maybe now we'll start with Tria, if that's okay.
Sure. So why do elections matter? I once went to this really amazing training in the States, so this group called Wellstone Action. And they talk about a triangle of action where you have community organizing, electoral politics, and policy as three sides of a triangle. And you can't get the policy changes that you want to see happen without community organizing and without electoral politics. And if you just do electoral politics without good policy that you're pushing for and ideas that people want to get behind, that's nothing. And if you're just doing community organizing without thinking about engaging in the electoral process, you might not be as successful. So I like thinking of everything as kind of a triangle that fits together. Electoral politics in of themselves aren't going to change anything, but they need to be part of the strategy, the tool in our tool belt, along with community organizing to fight for a better world. So I kind of like that triangle. And then in terms of other kind of tools, somebody mentioned the Green Party. We haven't talked about things like Quebec Solidaire. I have a friend right now who's up in the Northwest Territories, and up in the North, it's a lot more consensus-based government decision-making. There's a lot of different models of government and governance that we can kind of look at. I think the most important thing is being involved. And I was looking at the discussion, and there's lots of conversations about gatekeepers and the oligarchs and stuff like that. But I think sometimes people take for granted how easy it is to actually become a change maker in these areas. So I look at some of my friends and people that got elected recently, or they fought nominations to win nominations for provincial political party. And now we have someone like Mira Conway, who was just elected, who has publicly said the tar sands are a nightmare, which was one of the issues in the election. So that's very promising. And I think that all of us have the ability to strategically push the issues that we care about in very meaningful ways, and then also be that change to think about running. That's a plug I did want to make tonight. One of the challenges is if we don't have any progressive options or progressive people stepping forward, we don't make any change. And a good example is that Saskatoon School Board. We tried really hard to recruit people to run for school board in Saskatoon. In Regina, we had almost 7 progressive candidates. We had folks across the board. We couldn't find anyone to run in Saskatoon for school board. And people were acclaimed. So there was literally people there. The school board seat in Warman for Prairie Spirit School Board, nobody fucking ran. right? Just nobody ran. So in like a lot of these places, like when we're talking about like local government, like the barrier for involvement is really low, but your ability to make change can be very high. Like if you were the city, like the school board trustee for Warman speaking out against the provincial's policy cuts on education, like you could have a huge difference on a provincial level, but nobody stepped up. So part of that is like the work we all need to do is recognizing that all of us can step up and make a huge difference. And so hopefully next time elections roll around in 4 years, we'll have some people like from the progressive slate that are like wanting to run for things like school board and stuff too. So if you're interested, call me.
Tria, someone mentioned in one of the comments about like do we need a party that's just farther to the left, right? Like an anti-capitalist political movement, like a socialist movement, or like what are your thoughts on that? And I hope I don't want to take too much time for the other panelists, but I just wanted to make sure that one question got addressed too. What are your thoughts on that?
Like I think that is definitely something to think about. Like there's a concept in political organizing and thought called the Overton Window, which is the window of possibility. And right now, especially in Saskatchewan, the window is like very narrow because there isn't really anyone on the left creating that kind of opportunity. And like I think about a lot of pipelines, like around a lot of people in the NDP, like who are kind of leftist adjacent, are disappointed the NDP's perspective on pipelines. But the loudest voice on pipelines in Saskatchewan is Steelworkers Union, right? The people who are literally manufacturing the pipes. And there hasn't really been like a lot of traction around anti-pipeline work in Saskatchewan. Yeah, and there's lots of reasons for that. The lack of capacity, like we don't have a lot of like nonprofit organizations. We don't have a paid left, like a staffed left, like they do in a lot of provinces. So there's, I think, a lot we can do. So a political party is an option, but also just like funding and supporting leftist organizations like the Harm Reduction Coalition, like Black Lives Matter, that can be that opposition. It doesn't have to be political parties. I think we just need to have more voices on the left that are pushing for more progressive policies in order to create this support for politicians, regardless of the party, to do the right thing.
Thanks, Tria. It was great. Tommy?
All right, so the question was, why do elections matter? It's a good question. Elections matter because this is the system that we happen to live in, and our disbelief or our distrust of something does not like negate its importance or its existence. I think I've said this already, but again, I think there's a lot of like people, especially young people, not voting or losing hope in that election process because they don't feel represented, or because I think a lot of people have just a bad view of politics and politicians. People don't trust politicians for the most part, and I think it's right to not trust your politicians fully, because if you just put faith in them and you just look away, I think they will take advantage if they're given the reins to do so. And what's the point of voting if it's like the same disconnected, unaware, and dismissive politician who's going to keep getting voted into power, or the same person or a similar person? I think that though this is like a popular mentality, I think this is something that we need to fix. We need to reinstate people's belief in the political system. I think what is gonna help people believe in elections more is groups like us, groups like grassroots organizations. I think perseverance and paying attention to what's going on is going to help people build their faith in elections again. I think there is a glass ceiling with elections right now, but glass ceilings don't just break if we just like sit there looking pretty and hope they fall. I think we need to throw some stones, bring out some baseball bats, and make ourselves heard. Elections matter because they make people mad. They make people really upset. And that upset usually turns into a passion for something that can be mobilized and can be used to create real change. I think right now there is, like Tria said, there isn't a lot of representation for a lot of progressives. there is a very prominent like far right movement in Saskatchewan, and there is a movement that we do call the left, but I think it's more centrist. I think people are seeing our ass as radical because the left is like the leftists they're used to aren't leftists really, they're just centrist, they're moderates. So I think helping people understand that asking for things like harm reduction and that people have homes is not a radical notion. Helping people understand that there's more that I think people need to dare to dream outside of the system that we're currently in and outside of the options that are like plainly laid in front of them. We need to dare to dream of something different and then work towards that. We need to mobilize people into finding things that they are passionate about. Like if you don't care about elections, there is something you do care about. What do you care about? You need to find that thing. I need to work on that thing and put your all into that thing. If you're not seeing any politicians that represent you, hey, it's a free country, get in the game. You, as Tria said again, we can all be change makers, and there has never been a better time than now, especially for young people. I think I see a lot of younger generations getting more involved, even in local politics. I think the election in the States has brought a lot of light to political systems everywhere, and that people are starting to ask hard questions of our politicians. And right now it may feel what's the word? It may feel like we're not getting anything done, but there's people like Jason who has been in this for years and who's been fighting for change, and he's seen change. And I think that elections are a way to create like to get the ball rolling for people who want to create change. I think elections are a great way to force people to get involved in their communities and force them to get involved and get I'm sorry, I'm finding it hard to put this into words. If there's an election and you see and there's something you want done and you you're not seeing it done, this is a great opportunity for you to go out into your community and do that thing yourself. If you don't see an option that you like, you can create a better option yourself. You can run for office, you can start an organization. Hey, BLM-YXC was literally started by young adults and high school age students. We planned the first rally together, just a bunch of us in the community. And now we're starting to do things like apply to be not a nonprofit organization and do community, reach out in the community and do webinars and educate people and reach out to people and cover issues that don't have to do with just our original mandate. We're reaching past what we originally set out to do. So I think elections are important because they push people to make the changes that they want to see but aren't necessarily seeing.
Thanks, Tommy. That was wonderful. Jason?
Yeah, so I think elections are a means to an end, but like I don't give a fuck who's elected. I'm getting my way when it comes to public policy. Like it's a matter if we're going to actually create social movements. Like you don't hear MLK saying, well, maybe the elected leaders, if you got the coalition and you got the bodies on your movement and you're moving forward, the political parties will adapt to you. And so that's been my philosophy this whole way. And people said it's impossible for something like harm reduction on the prairies. I think we're showing that it's totally possible, and so there's always people that are going to tell you that something's not possible or that you got to be more polite. You got to get the politicians on side. Fuck those people. They don't know what they're talking about. They're the reason why we're in the situation we are. It's a matter that if you want to be a progressive person, you have to set the pace, and so that might mean you have to work with different groups that have different visions than you, or you're similar on certain topics, but it's up to us to set that pace. And so I can't stress that enough. And so yes, elections are important, but if you actually want social movement, get your social movement and let the politicians come to you. There's no reason why, when we were setting out the safe consumption site, we didn't think, are the politicians going to be okay with this? Can we get them on board? That would have taken us fucking forever. You know, and the reason we knew that we needed to just move ahead on what we were doing was we looked at the AIDS movement in the 1980s. They were not polite. You know, being polite is what kills social movements. So you have to be aggressive, and like, you just have to be comfortable in that fight. Like, yeah, my nose is going to get bloodied. Yeah, I might get taken out and somebody else put in, but like, that's part of the movement. When you're doing a social movement, you're either all in or all out. And so it's one thing to talk about social movements. It's another thing to really put yourself out there. And, you know, Black Lives Matter in Saskatoon is a good example of that. They really had to put themselves out there to get any sort of response out there. And the cost was heavy on a personal level. I know it was. I'm dealing with similar stuff, but like, you have to put yourself out there, and people will follow you. Like, if you ever told me that there'd be, you know, 1,000 plus or however many people in a Black Lives Matter rally in Saskatoon, I would have thought you were fucking high. Like, and yet they were able to get that. So people want to support these causes. You just need to lead them. And this whole thing about leadership from the back, fuck that. Set the pace. Like, are you the pace boat or are you not? So if you're the pace boat, get in your canoe and push the pace and let the rest of them catch up to you. It is not our job as leaders to try to mobilize these bodies that just are going to be do-nothings. They'll go away. Focus on the people that are coming to your cause. Focus on the strength of your cause. But do not get caught up in that other shit. So elections, yeah, they're important, but like, elections should be adapting to social change, not the other way around. And I think for a long time, you saw the same thing in the NDP with Alberta. They got their people into power, and then what? It was like seeing a puppy. They didn't know what to do when they caught the car, you know. And so when we're here, like I don't care what the NDP platform is. I don't care what the Sask Party platform is. I know what my platform is socially, and that's what I'm pushing. And so we have to be on that level if you want to be progressive here. Because if you spend too much time trying to get the politicians on board, your message is going to be dead, and then you don't even know it, and you're going to be selling them on their message, because they're professional talkers, and so they're good at that. You know, like that's what they're there to do. And so it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. So my thing, when I'm going into a meeting, I know what my agenda is for. Set that agenda and go after it, and go for the fucking kill. Like, you have to go after that stuff. Like, that shit drives me so crazy. Yeah, you need to compromise on some stuff, but at the end of the day, I'm very clear on what I want, and I'm not going to be. We got 2 support workers instead of funding for this consumption site. Great, where's my fucking funding for the consumption site? Like, I'm not going to do the bait and switch. We're here for what we're here for.
Thank you, Jason. It reminds me of my dad's lecture about why collective bargaining and how it should be done. It's impressive, I think. Barb, to you.
So, you know, yeah, I do think elections matter. And there's a really good line in the movie Trial of the Chicago 7. And I'm going to garble it, but Abby Hoffman says, yes, elections matter. They are the quiet revolutions where we overthrow our government every 4 years. And I love that. Or at least we try to. You know, elections matter. You look down in the US, that is the best example for how and why elections matter. And I have to say that I do not believe that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won that election. I think that the movement for Black Lives Matter won that election. I think that unions won that election. I think that every progressive organization, the Sierra Club, the Green parties and Green organizations, they won that election. But no one will ever convince me that the Democratic Party won that election, because everybody pulled out the stops in order to make that change, because their lives depended on it. They had a goddamn Cheeto in the White House who was destroying people on a daily basis. So if you ever think that elections don't matter, just look south of the border. In this province, elections matter because we are more and more influenced by what happens south of the border. Our politicians attend the Republican National Governors Conference. Like, what the hell are we doing there? They attend, you know, the Republican Party events. That's what our politicians in our province, in our country are attending, and that's who is influencing them. So you better believe that elections matter. You better believe that guys like Jason speaking that kind of truth matters. And so I don't care if it's the Green Party, I don't care if it's the NDP, and I don't care if it's the Sask Party, because we need to own that table. People need to understand that when you come to play in Saskatchewan as a politician, you got to answer to some pretty powerful progressive movements. And here's the other thing, now that I'm on a roll. Being powerful within the political spectrum, whether it's Prairie harm reduction or Black Lives Matter or, you know, like the QP campaign in the last provincial election, owning that power is nothing to be embarrassed about. Being a powerful union that can talk to politicians and move something off a table, that is nothing to be embarrassed about, because it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Elections matter, and because if you are doing this for the right reasons, if you can answer the question, am I doing this for my members' benefit? And you can answer that as yes, then you're doing the right thing. So if you can answer the question, am I using this power for the good of my members in this election? And you can answer that question with a yes, then yes, elections matter.
Thank you, Barb. And I mean, just really important issues you're all bringing up. I'm curious if you worry about organizational burnout. I'm just thinking of like the activism that you've all been sort of talking about and the work you do. And then of course it intensifies at these moments of heightened activism, elections and others. Do you worry about institutional and personal burnout, and that this could like really, it's hard to sustain over the long haul in terms of moving the agenda forward? And I'm just curious if you worry about that and how you might have addressed that in the past. And I'm hoping this is getting to some of the questions. I'm trying to synthesize some of the questions as they're coming in. So if the audience is, if I'm missing anything, please do feel free to ask it again. Would you mind taking that first, Jason, and then we'll move, I think it's Jason that's next, and then we'll move around.
Yeah, so this is an important one, and I've seen social movements burn out in Saskatchewan, and I've seen them burn out all over the world. And I think this is part of why you need to create a movement. So a lot of times people think like we're advocating for our safe consumption site funding. Yes, at the same time we're helping building up capacity within other organizations. We're creating a space where it's safe for them to talk about harm reduction. There's organizations in Regina that are now talking about safe consumption sites or overdose prevention sites. We have ones in PA and North Battleford. And so an organizational burnout is real, and you know, leadership changeover is a real thing within nonprofits. I think it's also dangerous to have the same person leading a movement at all points in time. You create, when you're talking about owning that power, Barb, I agree with you 100%. You need to be like when we had a question asked about the safe consumption site at the electoral debate or the leadership debate, that for us is like steak on the table. That's exactly where we want to be. We want to be in the conversation. We want to be in the mix. What I've seen happen in other movements, like in Métis, and I've seen this happen in the Métis movement, where you have Métis leaders that were around way too long, and they clung to their power. You know, because even within social movements, you can have people cling to power, and then they become the oligarchs themselves, and they'll never know it. I could be in that boat in a year now. I don't even know, you know? And so like that happens. And so I think that's when you're looking at creating a movement, you need to create multiple pockets of the movement with multiple people coming at multiple angles. And so like when Barb was talking about the discourse within our union, and she's healthy, where you create that space where you can have that conversation, that is super, super important when you're talking about social movements as well. That you actually have to create a multi-headed monster. You need that Hydra to really come at it. And when we're looking at harm reduction in Saskatchewan, the movement's going to be, otherwise it creates an easy target. You eliminate prairie harm reductions out of the prairies. Well, I don't think so. You know, I think we got a couple other people that are already there, or they're up and coming, and we've created a space for them to take over leadership. And then when they do something that's really good, when Regina builds their consumption site, we'll be pushing everybody to the Regina consumption site to donate and do all those things, because they need that capacity built up really quickly so that we can then move on to the next one and the next one. And so that's part of like even our fundraising strategy. We're desperate for funds to run our consumption site. Our first fundraising category, we funded a nursing harm reduction conference in Saskatchewan that's been going on a shoestring budget. Now, because of t-shirt sales, we're going to be one of their title sponsors next year for nursing, harm reduction nursing unit. And then when we're looking at, like we're funding Choke Cherry this year, like where it's going to be, or with this the latest line, and next line of clothing is going to be for a new organization. You have to spread out that power, you have to spread out that money, and you have to really start putting seeds down to get that social movement up and running. And so that burnout's real though, and you have to be comfortable when you are burnt out to just take a step back and let somebody take a step forward. And I think sometimes as leaders, you can get really worried that nobody's going to step up. Power vacuums cause shifts for sure, but there's going to be somebody that'll step into that sphere. It might not be what you would do, but it's still going to be something, and it's still going to be progressive. And so you have to be comfortable letting up the reins sometimes.
Thanks, Jason. I think I messed up the order. Tommy, you're at the sort of the ground level of a new organization also, and obviously it's taking a lot of emotional support to keep going. How have you thought about that question?
I think burnout, as Jason said, is definitely a really big problem in young movements, and that was something we were very worried about after we had there's three Black Lives Matter rallies in Saskatoon in the past few months after following the death of Eric Garner, and we were really worried about keeping that momentum and keeping people engaged and keeping people onto this fight. And I know personally I was so worried about keeping this fire burning that I let myself burn out personally. And I think the way around that is making sure that we have support systems in place to help us when that happens, that we have spaces that we can come into and decompress and talk about mental health. That's a really big thing to do with burnout. I think mental health is really important because fighting against racism can cause depression. It can make you anxious. There's a lot of comorbidities that can arise as from the fact of just being an activist. So I think having those spaces where you can decompress. I know after the BLM rally, we wanted to have like a little movie night for all the youth that planned it, so we could all just talk about how we felt. We had a little decompression meeting after, so we could talk about how it went, how any issues that arose, any things that we wanted to change moving forward. I think building that community and knowing that if I am unable to get up to date and get into the fight, there's someone else there who can take my place and help and make sure that the wheel keeps turning. And I think it's also important that we know that we need to start a forest fire, not a bonfire, because bonfires will burn out, but forest fires will burn longer. We need to start a movement that will continue to catch flames. We need to have something that will keep that people want to keep coming back to. Right now on our Instagram, again, we have this initiative called Prairie Harm Reduction that's just on hiatus right now, but we're trying to create things like that aren't always about the really hard stuff, that isn't about the really traumatic stuff, but it's just a space for people to talk about how they're feeling in this moment and to give platform to something else that matters to them that is not the movement. Because like when I was a kid, I didn't imagine that I'd grow up and I'd be fighting for for racial justice. Like I didn't dream of being an activist as a little girl. Yes, I cared about political issues, but that was like when I would write stories, because I'm a writer primarily. When I would write stories, I wouldn't write about racism. I'd write about things that matter to me. And I think as activists, because we are so passionate about the cause we're fighting for, we pour all of ourselves into the issue and then throw the jar in for good measure. But we need to remember that outside of this issue, that we are still people and we still have needs that need to be met. We still have their basic things to being a human, like eating, like showering, like just taking care of yourself, taking time to taking time to get to know the people that you are working with in a way that's not always like hardcore anger, like fighting for this thing, making time to get to know the people as people outside of the fight for justice is really important, because then coming to work and trying to achieve these goals won't always feel as heavy as it will naturally, because you're coming there with friends, you're coming there with people who you care about and who you know care about you and who will support you when you aren't able or when you need to take a break. Trying to see if there's anything else I wanted to add to that. Yeah, there's just some days you need to just, I don't know, like lay in bed and watch Netflix all day. And the movement is still going to be there when you wake up in the morning. Like the movement isn't going anywhere. The movement is still there. And while it is important to keep at it, we are human beings. We are not machines. And we cannot fight for change if we're like dead, you know? So, yeah.
Thanks, Tommy. Tria and then Barb.
So I think this question's like very personal for me. So the last municipal elections, I guess that was 4 years ago, I managed 3 campaigns by myself. And so I was the only person managing campaigns in Regina. I got 1 out of 3 people elected, so not too bad. And then I burnt out. So I had to be on like a leave from work for about 9 months because my mental health was just in shreds because I had worked too hard. And I was also by myself, and it was very lonely. And so this election, I was able to work with a team of people, and that makes such a huge difference, is like being part of something, but also building that capacity so you're not doing it alone. So this time we had great candidates, but we also made sure that each candidate had a campaign team that we also trained and supported, because people need to have teams behind them, and it can't just all be on like individuals like me and like myself, like many people that are probably on this call, like feel a lot of passion for what I like for social justice, and like it oftentimes is my life, but that like really isn't healthy in the long run. But like I think one of the most important things to do and the hardest thing we can do is build leadership capacity. And I think there's like some questions in the thread that I don't think really got answered, but like, how do we do better at messaging? How do we do better at engaging? Like all of us collectively need to invest in learning how to do that, but also building more of us so that next time we are fighting for something, there's even more of us that have the skills and the capacity to take step on. That's, I think, so important, and like really what I want to be focusing on. Like Jason said, like doesn't really matter who the politicians are for me. Like it doesn't really matter what the issue are. The issues are all interrelated. Like I don't think we can be working on labor rights without addressing systemic racism, without addressing capitalism, like somebody said. So all of these issues are interrelated, and I think we need to do much better at working together, at building community and building effective leaders.
Thanks, Tria, so much. That was great. Barb?
You know, it's hard to say if you can see to a burnout of an organization when fighting for these issues or fighting for elections. It is movement building. It is supposed to outlast each one of us. So I think that's sort of the changed frame that we have to look at this in. This is not our own little fiefdoms. This needs to be about, you know, outliving ourselves, and also our job is to, you know, create an organization that will outlive us, but also create an organization that continues to build runways for people to be able to take off with their activism and take off and really make a difference and replace us. My husband and I laugh about, you know, we're not Star Trekkies, but in Star Trek, there's a theory that if you're wearing a red shirt, you are going to be one of the guys that dies. So, you know, we have to be the red shirts in Star Trek. We have to be the people who can be replaced. So I think that's important, you know, super nerdy, geeky, and, you know, that's my weird sense of humor, but that's the way it is.
Can I just interject and say that this panel has brought me so much joy now that there's been like such solid sports references and also like such a solid Star Trek reference.
But I think the other thing on the personal level, you know, burnout is it's real, it's legitimate, and I don't know what the answer is for that. You know, there's right now I have 11,000 members who are on the front line of a pandemic, and you know, like, my job is hard and I work incredibly long hours, but I think about it this way: I have 11,000 members who are on the front line of a pandemic. I'm okay. Like, I can keep working, because if they're working, I can keep working. You know, I live in North Central Regina, and you know, it's the hood. It is my neighborhood. And I think, you know, the people who live in my neighborhood are extremely poor, and they have really tough lives, and I'm doing okay. When I look at how life could be, I'm doing okay. So it's one of those there but for the grace of God arguments. And it also reminds me on a daily basis that my job is to help people. Whether they're my members or not, my job is to be there as another human to help lift up others. And so, you know, that is the thing for me that really reins in any sort of notion of burnout. When you put yourself in the frame of what others are going through, yeah, I mean, my job is fucking hard, but my job is actually to lift up the person who lives across the street. And my job is to lift up the lab tech who's just finished a 24-hour shift. And I'm okay with that. That's sort of, when I'm able to change the frame into that perspective, I get my second wind. And I know it's a bit hokey, but you know, it's what I do in order to sort of regroup.
Thanks, Barb. I just conscious of time. We're about 8 minutes from concluding. I like how what I got really excited about the left when I was young was an old wobbly saying that it was like an injury to one is an injury to all. And I think in different ways, you all echo that sort of in a lived experience, that the suffering of others, the oppression of others really motivates you in different ways to fight for a better world. And elections are a small part of that in many ways. And it's really amazing to see the energy you all bring to those different questions. And I'm sorry that we can't get to all the questions. People have asked about climate change, how to engage different groups like a union like the steelworkers who might be hostile because their jobs are at stake. And there's been questions on campaign financing, and like all just excellent questions. And I have to apologize to the audience for not being able to get to all of them. But I want to end with this very specific question. And I'm going to ask Tomilola and Jason first, is how can we as an audience support your organizations, and what's the best way to do that as soon as we can? And then when you're able to answer that, just thank you all for participating. It's been a real honor to moderate such an incredible group of activists. Tomilola, feel free to start.
Sure. So how can people support our organizations? Obviously, there's the more concrete aspects like donating money or time. But I think, again, activism starts at home. And this anti-racism fight that we're fighting, it is multifaceted. It has lots of twists and turns, and there's a lot to it. But I think apart from the frontline work that we're doing, trying to talk to politicians, trying to get laws passed, or just what we're doing on the bigger scale on education, I think personal education is really, really important, because as we saw from the renewal of the Black Lives Matter movement that followed Eric Garner's death, there is a lot of racism in our daily lives that we don't even realize is there. There's a lot of things rooted in racism that we have just taken as status quo and that we have just accepted. And these are the things we need to start to educate ourselves on, and we need to start to fight against. For the organization as a whole, donating your time, attending our webinars or seminars when we have them, rallies when we start to have those again, and post-COVID, just we're going to start doing a lot of outreach to schools, run for fundraisers for other community organizations, or just again a lot of it's really education based, honestly. But right now it's you can look at our social media. We have a lot of stuff on there. We have a link in our Instagram, Black Lives Matter YXC, that you can go to. You can see ways to donate, ways to help, resources if you want to educate yourself on how to talk to your family about things, how to begin to start the fight for racial justice at your own workplace. We have a lot of resources for that on our Instagram, and I will make a note to make a more conducive master list for that. But yeah, I think just keeping ourselves and the people around us accountable is really important, because we can do all the work we want. We can reach out as much as we want, but we need to change the hearts of people. We need to, especially here in Saskatchewan and in Saskatoon, we need to change the hearts of people. We need to help them. We need to make people understand that racism is outdated and that we're not going to stand for it anymore. It's not something that we're going to tolerate anymore. It is not something that we're going to allow in our schools, in our boardrooms, and anywhere that decisions are being made. We need a zero tolerance policy on racism at the baseline.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you for your words and the courage in your activism. It's wonderful. Jason?
Yeah, I think you can follow us on social media. Outside of financial donations are definitely needed and appreciated. You can follow us on social media. I think calling your MLA and telling them that you support the safe consumption site, and what do they? Calling the premier, saying that you support the safe consumption site, do they? And then on top of that, I think if you just, depending on where you live in the province, I think getting trained on the lock zone and then having discussions, especially with Christmas coming up, around addictions with your family. We have one of the nice parts about social media is we poke fun at ourselves, we poke fun at politicians, we poke fun at the public, but we also have a lot of good education resources on there. We have a really tight 3-4 minute video on our safe consumption site pinned on all of our social media pages that really breaks down what it is and why you should support it. And we have wide support from all demographics on that video. And I think it really when we did that video, we were really looking at ways that we could approach people that don't support social causes and how we can get them on board with that. And so showing that video, I think, can go a long way. But I think really following us on social media and then sharing our messaging on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook is really good. Plus, you're going to potentially learn some things.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you also for your courage words and all your activism, all that you do. Tria and Barb, we have 3 minutes. Can we split that up, 1.5 minutes to Tria and 1.5 minutes to Barb?
Sure.
Go.
Go ahead, Tria.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Tria.
I think I'm like here, I'm not really speaking from a specific issue. I just hope that I can organize with a lot of you in the future. Charles, before people got on, we're talking about the divide between Regina and Saskatoon. So it's really nice being on this call with all of you, and let's keep kicking ass together. And I hope to work with many of you to continue to try to make some changes in this province.
Thank you, Tria, and ditto on the courage of your convictions and your words. And Barb, last word to you.
So I would say, it's not just a matter of following Prairie Harm Reduction or following Black Lives Matter YXC or following SEIU-West or CUPE or whoever. You need to actively speak up. You need to stand up and square your shoulders and be very public about it. If we actually want to be a progressive movement, not just progressive individuals, then we have to stand up and speak out for each other. And that takes, you know, balls or lady balls, whatever you want to call it, but it takes courage. And that's what progressives need. We need a hell of a lot of courage right now. And I think we have the beginnings of it, but we cannot take our foot off the gas.
Thank you, Barb. That was a great way to end it. Just a quick reminder for those on the call that this was brought to you by Stop the Cuts and the Stand. The Stand is actually looking for board members, and we look forward to working with all of the groups on this call in the future. We have some exciting announcements about virtual online space for organizations that need it that will be available to organizations through the Stand. Thank you so much for everyone on the call. Thank you for the panelists. I was moved by your bravery and your words. It was quite amazing. Just thank you very much. And it's been a real honor to host this panel tonight with 4 great activists in our communities. Thanks very much.
Thank you. It was so nice to meet all you guys.
Ditto, yeah.
So nice to meet you too.
Can I add you all as friends on Facebook?
Please. Oh wait,
For
well, we
sure.
already are.
I'm bald in my Facebook picture, so there's that. I look a little different.
Are we?
Yeah,
Is it
for
done
sure.
now? Or are we still like a?
There's still attendees on. There's 20
okay.
Oh,
people.
Yeah,
Okay.
once I close the meeting, it's over. So thank you so much. And I'll be sending you emails. Such a great panel. We really appreciate it. Really good questions from the participants.
I'm just curious, are you going to share like the Twitter and the Instagram handles and the Facebook links for everybody? Because I think that would be really helpful. I know that I'm furiously writing notes to, you know, I'm going to look for Prairie harm reduction. I'm going to look for Black Lives Matter, and, you know, like and share, make sure that that is a constant.
Yeah, no, that's a good reminder. In our next newsletter, we'll be sure to not only include the recording, but all the handles and connections to all the folks represented tonight. Awesome.
Cool.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Nice meeting you all.
Nice
See you
meeting you
again.
too.
Take care.
Bye.